I don't believe this. I mean, you actually thought there was something going on between me and Fred?
I can't even dignify that with a response. You like him better than me, don't you?
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, I would like you to tell me, and only me, nobody else, what the trope is we are about to discuss.
I'm sorry, I can't tell you. I have something to do at work with my really sexy new coworker. Today, we are tempted by a sexy coworker. We're watching Growing Pains, Season 1, Episode 3, Jealousy, Roc, Season 1, Episode 20, A Piece of the Rock, The Simpsons, Season 5, Episode 9, The Last Temptation of Homer, and Til Death, Season 1, Episode 14, The Colleague.
Yeah, tempted by a sexy coworker. This turned out to be a great trope, I think. This lineup, in my opinion, is exactly what we're looking for with this podcast. You've got these 4 shows that are really going to overlap heavily with the stories. You've got sort of the same thing happening in each one of these shows, and yet a very different take and a whole different attitude from show to show.
Show to show. And the other thing is that this is in season 1 of almost all of our shows, 3 out of the 4. So it's one of the things that you like to say, it's true to real life. It's something that actually happens. So every couple kind of navigates this in their own different way. And it's something that the writers' rooms are kind of tackling early on because it isn't ridiculous, over the top, or, tropey.
No, exactly. And it's going to allow you to get to know the characters and their relationship. And yes, I noticed that too, that for once we're not dealing with season 12, episode 17 or whatever. These are early on. And even The Simpsons, which is season 5, you have to grade on a curve because The Simpsons are in like season 125 or whatever. So this is still relatively early going for them. But so speaking of the trope being taken from real life, this is something that you and I don't really have to deal with because one of us works from home and the other one despises her fellow employees of the opposite sex. So I'll just ask you.
I don't know if that's true.
That's kind of the impression I've got over the years.
I am a man hater.
Is this something, do you have any, experiences you'd like to share where you had some proximity to this phenomenon, where there's some new person in a workplace that kind of stirred up a lot of passions, or were you ever suspicious that somebody you were seeing was getting too chummy with somebody at work, anything like that?
I don't know that I was ever suspicious of anybody I was seeing being too chummy with people at work. I definitely have been accused of cavorting with a coworker, even when it's not true. There was a PE teacher at my first job that I was married then. I guess like the kids started noticing that we were flirting, and they would tease me. My 5th graders would tease me, and they would call me Mrs. whatever his last name was instead of my last name. And that I shut that down immediately. And I was like, no, because teachers are horrible gossips, and that guy, that would get around immediately. And then a couple years later, one of my teacher friends, I wasn't at that school anymore, but one of my teacher friends from that school was like, so and so said they saw you out at the bar with Brian and you guys were kissing. And I was like, no, definitely was false. Fully false. In fact, the time I did go to the bar and talk to that coach, that guy Brian, he was talking to me about and crying on my shoulder because the girl the teacher friend I was telling you about, he had a crush on her and she wasn't interested in him. So he's crying to me and I'm getting accused.
Yeah, this was not something I ever really dealt with because for all of the years that I was working, at offices and studios and stuff with people, I was single. So I was all too
You're
ready
like, please
for some,
let me be tempted by a sexy
young
coworker.
intern to strut in and take an interest with me. I will say I have seen this scenario play out with close friends of mine multiple times, where pretty much just like it is on TV, you have somebody who, somebody pops up at work who is a little bit younger, and the relationship just obviously doesn't have any of that baggage that your years-long marriage does, and they sort of zig where your wife zags. They're just sort of the opposite in every way. And yeah, people do tend to go through these sort of crises of like,
Right.
yeah, I kind of know what I have to do, but boy, it does make me stop and think. So yeah, I've seen the angst that this causes. Knock on wood, we haven't had any interlopers. We haven't had any Tisha Campbells come and try to tear us asunder so far.
Yeah, none of these cool like marketing girls, or what are they? The project managers on your
God.
Zoom calls. Their type A personalities haven't
so far
taken you away from me yet.
So far, they're fine to leave me be. All right, so let's start with Growing Pains. This is a show we talked about before in our Dream episode, but like we said, now we're going back to the early days. This is the third ever episode of Growing Pains, and there's a lot to take in just from the get-go here. We get, first of all, I remarked when we were watching Bosom Buddies how I appreciated the little narration at the beginning that just gives you this very straightforward, hi everybody, here's the premise of our show. Growing Pains does the same exact thing. It begins with the two of them telling you, the audience, what the premise of the show is.
Right.
And I didn't realize that Growing Pains basically began as sort of a Mr. Mom knockoff.
Yeah, there was like the twist on the family sitcom is, okay, the mom's going back to work and the dad is still working, but he's moved his psychiatry practice into the home. So he's now doing the cooking and all. And this little voiceover of the premise of the show only lasted for episodes 1, 2, and 3. And this is episode 3. So this is the last time it actually aired.
Yeah, well, that makes sense because that premise of the show is going to be very important to the goings-on of this. So I guess besides the fact that they just assume after the first few episodes you've got it, I could see why they would want to reiterate that. And so, yeah, this show starts with the family in the kitchen. You've got the two kids. Well, there's 3 kids. We have the 2 older ones, Mike and Carol. They have the same exact haircut at this point in time.
And their faces, like they have the same noses. I was like, wow, they really do look like brother and sister, although she wasn't originally cast. In the unaired pilot, it was somebody else, and then that girl didn't test well with the test audiences, so they replaced her with Tracy Gold.
Yeah, Tracy Gold at this point, I'm getting a little bit of Louise from Herman's Head vibes because
especially
of the short
hair,
haircut. But also with these glasses, I thought she was really reminding me of the Smart Chipette, the one with the glasses.
Oh,
I don't
from
know
the
if that's,
Alvin and the Chipmunks?
Yeah, I don't know if that's Brittany or I think Eleanor is the chubby one. I forget which one she is, but I was really getting that vibe with her big glasses and her kind of chubby cheeks. But yeah, she looks very cute, but it is funny how she has a completely different look, literally same haircut as Kirk Cameron, her brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole family is downstairs, and sorry to rag on all the styles, but the mom, Maggie, walks in with shoulder pads in the style of Frankenstein's monster. They are enormous.
So cool. Like, she's dressed so cool for that time period. She's got like the oversized blazer with no buttons and that has shoulder pads, and then the oversized shirt underneath that also has shoulder pads. So it's shoulder pads on shoulder pads, and then she's wearing this like off-center kind of side swoopy X-shaped belt.
Just when you say oversized, it's like if you've ever seen Stop Making Sense, the Talking Heads concert documentary where David Byrne wears this crazy, like, gigantic tuxedo that makes him into like a big puppet or something. It really is wild. But yeah,
she's got the double shoulder pad thing going on for sure. But I really was digging her belts. Like the look, I mean, when when she would put the blazer over it, I was like, all right, that's too much shoulder pad. But when she just had the regular, like, oversized shirt and belt on, I thought she looked good.
My final comparison is going to be the guy in the office in Beetlejuice who's like hanging like a clothesline and gets like strung through the office. The way it's just like this totally flat like bar of
across her shoulders.
Yeah. Okay, moving on from the shoulders. Yeah, she comes into the room because, you know, she's, I don't think it's her first day or anything, but she's early goings in this job she has as a reporter. Right. Like you said, Jason, the dad, is in this Mr. Mom scenario, and we immediately start getting the cringy vibes that are like Ross from the last Will They Won't They episode. He's all up in her face. He's asking, you know, can I come have lunch with you at work, right? This is my nightmare. Already, I'm like, you know, she's telling him like, gee, I don't know. It's kind of busy. I'm reporting on a toxic waste story because it's the 80s. So, of course, her assignment is toxic waste expose. And yeah, he's just like...
She's Aaron Brockovich.
Yeah, and he's just not taking no for an answer with this, like, I cannot go a full 8 hours without being in your presence. We need to have lunch together. And even Kirk Cameron, the son, kind of has to, like, intervene and be like,
Dad,
Mom,
get some chill, yeah.
Well, he tells her, he's like, Mom, this is getting hard to watch. Like, come on, you got to let the guy take you to lunch. But yeah, you immediately get that dynamic of, like, he's needy.
Oh, see, and that's interesting because I didn't pick up on the cringe or the kind of controlling nature that I feel like Ross was giving when we were having that conversation about him and Rachel in the last Will They Won't They. This to me was like she's trying to get out the door. Everybody's trying to get out the door except for Jason, the dad, and he is like, hey, you know, I'll see you at lunch because they had plans that she would come home for lunch. Uh-huh. And she was like, oh, I totally forgot. I'm so sorry. And then he's like, well, maybe I should come take you out. And she's like, yeah, I don't know because it's busy. And that's when Mike intervenes and he's like, I'll just come to you, you know. And she's like, yeah, that's okay. So because it was like at first she forgot that they had plans, I felt like there was a little bit more of a balance. But yes, as the episode goes on, it's really interesting to watch Alan Thicke's character, Jason, kind of devolve into this, like, you're never here, I'm so needy, I'm always by myself, even though the kids are sitting, like all of that coming out of him, all that insecurity sort of jumping to the forefront. Yeah,
so he does show up at her work and... Fred Mathis, right? Yes. That is her coworker. This guy is a tall drink of water. I just love the 1980s version of like, let's see, you know, you're Alan Thicke. You're
what's hot compared to you?
Yeah.
Somebody really tall, except for he's not even that really tall. So we've got to put Alan Thicke in a chair that swallows him. So it makes him look even taller.
This guy is tall. He's got the vibe of like maybe a white basketball player or football player or something. But he
does give athlete vibes, but he's older. So yeah.
Well, because again, that's we're playing right into the stereotypes, right? If there's a woman who's a threatening, you know, outside force, she's always going to be a little younger. I feel like with the man, he's going to be a little older. And just what I mean by the 80s aesthetic of it all, he's got that...
So this is just from the male perspective then, because like, I don't know that the man who would tempt me would be necessarily older.
Well, I'm not saying it applies universally, but I do feel like, look, maybe it is just a trope that doesn't bear out, but I feel like that is a very common stereotype, is that women tend to like those older, more sophisticated men.
When we're young, not when we're grown with children.
But regardless, he's got the Clark Gable mustache, right?
Yes, he does.
And he's got that rat face that nobody's going to get this reference, but there's this actor, Warren William, from the 40s, not even the 40s, like the 20s and 30s, who's in one of my favorite movies ever, Skyscraper Souls, who is exactly this role. He's supposed to be like the old, powerful millionaire that's going to seduce your young girlfriend. And yeah, there was a time when this was considered the hot guy. And
I don't know when that time was.
Well, that's the thing is, even by the 80s, I feel like it's already a little passé, but I'm telling you, the casting of this guy, having just watched Gone with the Wind a few weeks ago,
right.
You see the leftover vestiges of that version of a handsome man, that old-timey strapping dude with this little mustache.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he gives like a little bit older, kind of like Burt Reynolds, Tom Selleck-y thing. Like the mustache is a big part of it. Yeah, but he does. He's got that like, what's the world's most interesting man or something like that.
The Dos Equis guy.
Yeah.
Yes. And what's really going to make Jason on edge is he calls Maggie Mags.
That's right.
And I could see this being a thing.
And he says it, okay, this is annoying though, because he says the word Mags 15 times in his 5 lines. He's like, Mags and I do Mags and Mags this and Mags this and Mags, do you want to this? And hey, I think Mags and I are going to this and Mags this. And I'm like, you have 2 Mags in every sentence. You need to stop.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, I guess it's fine. Like we would have nicknames for each other and stuff like that in places where I worked. But it does seem, a little passive aggressive the way he's like, just so you know, I call your wife Mags all the time. And like, you're
Twice
not going to forget that.
in every sentence, just so you know.
What sort of happens is their lunch date gets sort of imposed on because, Fred, this dude is like, oh, have fun at lunch. Oh, darn, we have that meeting at 2. I need to talk to you before then. It's already 1:30. And so Jason graciously invites the guy to join them. And we don't even get to see the lunch date. We just sort of see the beginnings of it, that as they're walking out, Fred is like, oh gosh, I couldn't. Well, if you insist. And then sort of immediately is like, hey, Mags, let's talk about that thing. And they just kind of like shoulder Jason out of the whole dynamic.
Right. He is not getting to have a lunch with his wife. He's getting to sit there while she has a work lunch. And then immediately goes back to work and is giving all of her attention to this other guy, not like any type of romantic attention, literally just work attention. But it's enough that Jason doesn't know how to handle it.
Yeah. And then we just sort of cut back to the home, right?
Right. And it's like later that night.
Yes. Because Jason does the thing of answering a landline with somebody's name, right? This is something they would always do in the movies that I thought was so strange, where when they're eager for a call,
someone to call.
Yes, your landline rings and you go, Maggie, is that you? Where even if it was the person you were expecting, they would be like, Jesus, why did you answer the phone like that? I just always thought that was one of those bizarre like TV tropes.
Oh, that's interesting. I kind of always just took it as like, they were expecting the call and so they knew it was you or whatever.
But that's what he does. And it's not Maggie. Who is it?
It's Fred. Because Maggie's on her way home and Fred was assuming she was already there and was like, hey, is Mags there yet? And Jason's like, no, Mags isn't here yet, but I'll tell her. And, so he leaves a message for her. And so then Maggie gets there, as he's hanging up the phone and Jason's like, great, all right. And they sit down on the couch. How was your day? And she's like, it's just been such a long day. I don't even want to talk about it because I just want to leave it all behind and think about other things. And he's like, okay. And so then they go to like start having a conversation and Mike yells from the other side of the room, hey, Dad, don't forget to give Mom her message. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's right. Fred called and can't even get out the message before she like jumps over him to get to the phone and is like, oh my God, I've got to tell him about whatever, in the way that she didn't want to talk to Jason. Now she's going to get on the phone and debrief the day with Fred.
Yeah. And this is where, like I said, I saw these vibes from the get-go in the kitchen scene, but now Jason is in full insufferable mode.
Oh, yeah. And even before that, he was snapping at the kids, like, I don't know when your mother's going to be home.
Yeah. And so he's doing the thing of, what time are you going to be home? I don't know, 10:15. Well, which is it, 10 or 10:15?
Oh, yeah, this is the next morning. We get the next iteration of him trying to cook breakfast.
Yes.
That's this, like, we get 3 examples examples of that, like throughout the 3 different days that we're watching.
The breakfast scene is great. We get some really good sitcom sort of physical comedy here where they're having this confrontation and it's all sort of coming out that, Jason is not crazy about all this time she's spending with Fred and blah, blah, blah. And he's getting more and more tense. And you see him going through the kitchen, like putting the salt and pepper in the refrigerator and then throwing the frying pan into the garbage and then squirting the detergent, like a full bottle of detergent into the sink, just like sort of absentmindedly doing all these weird things with the kitchen props.
Right. And his whole thing is, I'm a psychologist. I know when people are, denying their feelings. I know what feelings I'm feeling. And the feeling I'm feeling is not jealousy. The feeling I am feeling is loneliness because my wife isn't here and I da-da-da-da-da. And he's just like trying to find every little thing that he can that would show that it's not about Fred and it's not about jealousy. It's about Maggie ignoring him or Maggie doing this or all these other things that have nothing to do with jealousy, right? And Maggie's so cute because she just is like sitting back, understanding how he's feeling. And, and she's like, I think it might be this. And he's like, absolutely not. So, if he's not going to address the problem head on, she has nothing to say. She's like, I love you very much. I'm not ignoring you. I'm sorry work is going late. I'm not sure when I'm going to be home. Sometime he was like, well, just give me an estimate. And she's like, sometime between 9 and 11. And he's like, that's not an estimate. An estimate is 10:06, 10:07, 10:05, like whatever. And she's like, 10 to 10:15, and he's like, well, which one? He's just so he's in such a tizzy.
Yeah, there's a fun little joke that's a little blue by Growing Pains standards where he goes, well, a lot can happen in 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
The Titanic sank in 15 minutes. He has a couple other examples. He goes, our last child was conceived in 15 minutes. At most.
Yeah, which is great.
But she goes back to work and we get another scene of the rest of the family waiting for her. And Jason is getting more and more tense. Yeah. And there's a part where Mike goes, hey, Dad, when's Mom coming home? And he goes, do I look like Gene Dixon, Mike? Which I don't know who the hell Gene Dixon is. That is a dated reference. Some kind of news guy, I guess.
No, she was like a psychic.
Okay, fair enough. But that delivery was hilarious to me. And then, Jason is like, that. I'm just going to go get her, because there's a point where he goes like, someone needs to look out for her safety. She's all alone. And then the daughter goes, well, she's not alone, Dad. She's with Fred. And he's
right,
like,
except for I think she says Frank, but I am like, maybe I misheard it. But I was like, did she just say Frank?
That's funny. I don't remember. I was too distracted by how hot Alan Thicke looks when he puts on his Letterman's jacket.
He really does. I was like, whoa, first of all, why is a grown man wearing a Letterman's jacket? This seems to be something the high school kid would wear.
I've never seen it before, but now I think I like this look. The whole time he's been wearing this work shirt, like just a button-up shirt with a little checker pattern and these brown pants, like they're either corduroys or just like normal slacks. And he just looks like kind of your normal down-the-middle dad. You add this Letterman's jacket and it's a really good look.
It is. It's one of these Letterman jackets that doesn't have a letter.
It's the JV jacket.
Yeah, right? It's the blank jacket.
Yeah, so he goes in his Letterman's jacket to the news office, and there's a funny scene where it's Maggie and Fred. They're working after hours, and they've got like the shades down in their office, and they see Jason. They see this like shadowy figure lurking outside of their office.
Yeah, it's like frosted glass. Yeah. I don't even know if it's the shades. I think it's an office that instead of having just glass, it has frosted glass.
Yeah, I thought it was like a cheap thing that you pulled down or something.
Well, because if that was the case, wouldn't they have just done the gag of like lifting it up and seeing him there? But instead they like went over to the door.
Well, this was what was so funny. There was a line they dropped earlier where Fred says to Maggie, a couple of goons tried to intimidate me when I did the story at that toxic waste dump. And
so they think that's what this is.
And Fred actually grabs a 3-hole puncher.
Yes.
And like poises himself at the door like he's about to clobber Alan Thicke.
Or whoever this goon is that's coming in. And Maggie grabs a stapler, opens it up and goes like...
Yeah, and I laughed out loud when they kick the door open and you just hear Jason off camera just kind of go like, oh!
Yeah, the door hits him in the face.
Yeah.
And he was like, good thing my nose stopped the door before it hit my face as he comes in.
He comes in, they're like, obviously, what are you doing here? And it's great. He's trying to justify. He's like, I don't know, Maggie, maybe a little someone called Ben, our son. You know, we haven't mentioned that there's been this B plot where Ben, who's an adorable little child in this first season, he's just trying to come up with a project for his science class.
Right.
And
so third grade science project, he has to come up with one, and everybody's been giving him ideas, and none of them are really the idea he wants. And he's like, Mom always has the best ideas. So Jason's like, that's it. He won't do mold.
Yeah,
he won't do whatever.
Well, this is what he said. He goes, it's Ben. He's got a bad attitude about mold, and it's just not ethical for him to do tadpoles again.
That's right.
Great line.
He had done tadpoles for his second grade science project.
Yeah. And so, you know, Fred excuses himself and is like, all right, this sounds like a personal thing that you guys have to work out. And then Maggie just basically flummoxes Jason with the very real, obvious, logical truth of it all. Like, she points out this past instance where he had a friendship with a female coworker, and, you know, all the little examples that she mentions. Yeah,
they were writing a paper together. They went on work trips together.
And the paper that they were writing is something like the benefits of human sexuality.
Yeah, it's
There's
like
a
the way to keep the spice alive or something of human sexuality.
Right, which is funny. This will tie into The Simpsons and maybe some of our other examples when there are these funny little side references to the things that the people are working on or watching or whatever are always like, are you considering cheating on your wife or something? Yeah. So, yeah, they had worked on a project about sexuality, and Maggie was like, and didn't you think it was weird that she always rode up front with you in the car? And he's like, well, she had those long legs.
She's like, that doesn't make it any better.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like little by little starting to dawn on Jason that, oh, this could have been a stimulus for her to feel jealousy. And he goes like, oh, but Maggie, I mean, that would be silly. That was a professional relationship. And she's like, no, duh. What do you think this is?
Exactly. And the other point that she made, and it was well made, was that it's like Jason, she says, after she gets him to finally realize that he is jealous, she says, hey, it's hard to be home alone while the other person is out and about and interacting with people, and your only interaction all day long are the kids. It's hard, and it's going to take some adjusting. But you know, I've done it for a long time, and I understand what you're going through. We should talk about it rather than you being like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm not jealous, and projecting all of this crazy nonsense onto everything else.
Yeah, the only thing that's weird about that is he has a job. Like, he's doing his psychotherapy from home, and they're playing it as though it is a full Mr. Mom, where it's like he has no
totally
stimulation and nothing to do. But yes, that point is well taken. And yeah, it is a very sitcom-y resolution, the way this guy who is, as he has pointed out to himself, a trained psychiatrist and a master of human thought, is just so completely lacking in self-awareness, a la Larry from Perfect Strangers or any number of other sitcom characters, until this one truth bomb sort of gets him to go, oh yeah, and like in one moment sort of realize the silliness of how he's behaving. And that is his word. He goes, I suddenly feel very silly. And Maggie goes, well, silly is a strong word, to which I say, no, it's not. There are much stronger words than silly for the way that this dude has been acting.
Yeah, I mean, it is handled in such a way where it's very caring. Like, they're not, there's no accusations really of one another. Like, Maggie is very, like, she gets it. She got it days before he got it, you know, and she's just waiting for him to figure it out, and is really, with no resentment at all, understanding of what he's going through. You know, whereas if you were in a bad relationship, she would have been like, oh yeah, well, how do you think I felt? And then, you know, I went through this for years. So if I can go through it, you can go through it. It doesn't have any of that, like, you racked up tallies and now I'm racking up tallies. They're in a healthy relationship, and they're like, hey, I see you're going through that. I've been there. It's going to be okay. I promise. Like, we'll get through it together. So it's a much more positive resolution.
Yeah, definitely. And on that same note, the characterization of Jason's jealousy is cute and
it is silly
and gentle. Yeah. Right. And even when he gets angry, it's funny. You know, he's another sitcom actor that has that touch like we talk about with John Ritter or Michael J. Fox, where there's just a gentleness to him that it just takes the edges off of these potentially cringy, storylines.
Sure.
All right, let's move on to Roc.
Season 1, episode 20, A Piece of the Roc.
Yes, now Roc was one I've been looking forward to covering ever since we started the podcast. I remembered this show, because I don't know. I remember watching it. I remember this being sort of Fox's attempt to make a more serious sitcom. Like you always talked about how you weren't allowed to watch Fox because of Married with Children and The Simpsons and all that. I think this was them going, hey, you families that don't let your kids watch Fox, what about this? What about a nice down-to-earth show about a working family? I think they were very much trying to capture the vibe of a Norman Lear show.
Yeah, starring all of these people that are direct from Broadway, very highly trained actors.
Yes.
Which, to my incredulity, after watching this episode, the main character, Roc, is one. He is one of these actors that doesn't look people in the eye. And that drives me crazy. He looks, and you can see his eye line in every single scene. He's looking at someone's cheek. He's looking at their mouth. He's looking at their shoulder. He's never looking them in the eyes. And it drives me nuts. And to me, it's the marker of a bad actor. And then I find out this guy went to Yale Drama and was nominated for a Tony. And I'm like, how is this even possible? It drove me nuts the whole show. I had to keep telling myself not to look at that so I could actually watch the show and not be so distracted by this thing that is a pet peeve of mine in acting.
That's funny. I didn't notice the eye line thing, but I definitely knew this about him. Roc is based on his real life. He was known as Roc because of his rock throwing battles that this guy got into.
Wait,
apparently.
what? I thought it was because he was kind of a big dude. It says on Wikipedia that they called him Rockhead or something like that, and then it got shortened to Roc. Keep going.
Reading. Keep reading the rest of that sentence.
There it is. Nickname Roc came from being involved in rock throwing fights when he was a kid.
Yeah.
He was originally nicknamed Rockhead.
Exactly. So Roc is short for Rockhead, which he earned in his rock throwing battles. But look, in all seriousness, this guy has done some living, right? He went to prison for manslaughter. He had all kinds of, troubles with the law in his younger days. And then, as you said, went on to be this very successful theater actor.
Yeah, he started a drama club while he was in prison because he got his sentence extended because he assaulted a corrections officer.
Yeah.
And then ended up having dropped out of school in 7th grade. He finished high school and his AA while in prison, and then came out and finished his undergrad at a school in Maryland and went to Yale Drama. I was like, what? What a life.
Yeah, so this guy has had this crazy life, and because of this show, he had a moment in the movies and stuff. He's in Alien 3 and a handful of other movies in the 90s.
Well, and prior to this show, he was one of this kind of crew of actors that did August Wilson plays.
Yes. Yeah. Now, what I will say in terms of his acting style, I didn't notice the eyeline thing. What I did notice immediately when he walks on the set is, this is a theater actor because he is screaming. And now, granted, his character is supposed to be excited. We might as well start getting into the story. He's excited that he's been named the official mentor of his garbage sanitation.
Right. He's a
location.
garbage man, and he is going to be the new trainer person for the new mentee.
Right. And he walks into this locker room just belting it to the back of the Coliseum, he just has that style.
He's
and again,
playing to the full house for sure.
Yeah.
And so at this point in the run, the episode that aired 2 before this was a live episode.
Yes, I remember these happening.
And then after that, because I guess it did so well, and almost everybody in the main cast is from Broadway, the entire season 2 was filmed live and broadcast live in the Eastern and Central time zones, and then the others got to see the 1 hour later.
Yeah, no, I absolutely remember this gimmick or hook or whatever you want to call it. And again, a nod to, the television of yesteryear. Now, what I'll say now, watching it in 2024, is, this was Fox's attempt at a more sort of prestigious, high-minded show. I don't know that it totally gets there, and because in part of the live recording and everything, you can see it's clearly shot on video. So just the look of it, and the Norman Lear shows were maybe too, but it doesn't look as nice as some of the other shows we talk about. And the sense of humor, even though it has this very sort of the people working class setting and everything, and it's not going to have the toxicity of a Married with Children or that kind of show. This is you still have the audience hooting and hollering every time.
It's still filmed on a Fox set, so people want to get involved. Yeah,
there's still that sort of ribald energy to it. When Roc makes a statement like, "No, of course I won't let the lady garbage collector drive," everyone's gonna give that a standing ovation. Yeah. There's still those elements of this hasn't quite reached the level of a proper, prestige TV show.
I think, prestige in the way that it is, they've got this amazing Broadway cast and they're trying, they're bringing all of their acting talents to bear. But yet we're still on Fox in the early 90s. So we're still going to tell these jokes about how women can't drive and how, it's all about sex and whatever. They're trying to be down to earth.
It's it's like Spock, like a child of two worlds.
Right.
It's got kind of 1 foot in each swimming pool. But this is going to revolve around Tisha Campbell, who, of course, we know from Martin and House Party and many things. She is going to be the tempter in this scenario. She's the new sanitation worker that Roc is going to be in charge of training.
That's right. Her name is Angela, and she is super into Roc. So after their first day on the job, he's like, "Oh, I'm going to have to do all the heavy lifting for her. I'm going to be the one doing the driving. I'm going to have to do all of it." And then they come back into kind of their locker room where they take off their coveralls and get back changed into their regular street clothes or whatever. They come back in after a day of picking up the garbage, and he's just like, "Man, we did that route faster than anybody else. You're such a great lifter." She's like, "Yeah, I work out and I'm a champion weightlifter or whatever, so I'm really good at that." And they just had a great day, and he was so excited, and he's saying, "Man, you really, you learn so fast. You pick up things so well. I'm so proud of you." And she's like, it starts taking off her coveralls and is immediately coming on to him.
Yeah, this is, I would argue, kind of the weakest of the 4 stories in terms of the way that this Angela character is portrayed. She's kind of a sociopath, it's one thing to say, "Oh, to have the experience of someone's throwing themselves at me. They're really attracted and they're really forward." But she is just kind of over the top to the point where, for me anyway, I kind of stop buying into the story.
Well, so I thought they were purposefully doing a subversion. I thought they were doing the way the men, when a man is sexually harassing a coworker, the way he won't take no for an answer, and that trope, I thought they were flipping that on its head and making her the aggressor in the same way we oftentimes see an older white man being an aggressor. And so then we had this moment throughout the episode, all these moments where Roc is trying to, I keep wanting to call him the Roc, where Roc is trying to explain to his friends and his family and his coworkers that this is happening, and no one is believing him.
Yeah.
In the same way that happens a lot of times to women, "Oh, it's all in your head." And, except for it's flipped because he's a man. So they're like, it's all in your head and she would never go for you.
Well, it's
so
not just that he's
making
a man.
fun of him as well, like, because he's older than her too.
Yeah, he's an old fat guy.
And she's super hot.
Yes. But I just want to be clear, this harassment that we're talking about, what actually happens is she comes on to him and he says, no, I'm happily married. And she says, so what? Who cares? And he keeps saying no. And then she grabs his butt and then she goes, sleep on it. And he goes, I'm not sleeping on nothing. So if you haven't watched the episode, I just want to be clear. When I say that it's characterized a little bit over the top, that's what I'm talking about. That she is like really, there is no nuance or shades of gray to her character. It is like, I am a force of nature.
Yeah. Like I said, that's why I thought they were trying to do this subversion where that character was written as though it was a male aggressor pursuing the woman who it doesn't matter how many times you say no, that no one's listening to you and you're supposed to say no. So you just go and sleep on it because I know you want me no matter what.
Well, and the gaslighting sort of happens because when they're in the bar and Roc is with his dad and his brother and one of his friends and he's explaining all this, first of all, there is this very 90s sensibility to the way he says it's sexual harassment, and he says it in this hushed tone.
Everyone laughs. That was so dated to me, right? Where this man says it's sexual harassment, and the audience and everyone, like the whole cast, just cracks up. It's ridiculous that a man could ever be sexually harassed. And I was like, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing, Roc. All right.
Yes. So yes, they're turning the tables in this very sort of 90s way. And then he calls over Tisha Campbell's character and she Michigan J. Frogs him, right? She will not let her attraction to him be seen or heard by anyone else.
No, that's right. And then everybody laughs at him and she goes off to the bathroom and they all leave. And then she comes back out and gooses him again and kisses him. And she's like, I just don't want you to get caught, baby. Yeah.
So he goes back to his wife. And again, I just want to emphasize that thing that she said about I'm just playing it cool so that nobody knows. I'm doing you a favor so that this is just between you and me. I think there's a way to play all of that is more true to life, where this could absolutely happen. And someone would be like, oh God, geez, she's got a point there. But because she's played arch villain style, and I think you're right, this is very much supposed to be a gender flip. It's still, at this point, it is like she is the Joker from Batman. She just seems like a villain.
She is a villain, for
and
sure.
So it is just there's no real getting into the head of Roc and, oh gee, what would I do if I were him? It's no, he's just got this dilemma he has to solve.
Yes, and it is a very clear dilemma. He's like, I can't get out of this. And then at the same time, we do see a little bit of oh my gosh, the episode's called A Piece of the Rock, or A Piece of Rock or whatever. Yeah. And she wants a piece. And he recognizes that. But what he doesn't do is what we saw George Jefferson and Bob Newhart do, which is, oh, look at that. Everybody kind of likes me. Hey, look at me. I'm gonna take that as a stroke to my ego. But also, not really. But no, he doesn't do that at all. He's like, this does not stroke my ego. I don't like this. I don't want this. I don't want this dilemma. I don't want to be a part of this. I've got to tell everyone and anyone so that they can help me get out of it. And nobody believes me. So the only person I have left to tell is my wife.
Yeah. And in that way, it does feel like sort of sitcom 1.0 to me, the way they're not exploring, just like you said, the ideas of what is it like, even though it's wrong and you don't want to act on it? What is it like when you find out that this other person is attracted to you? They're just not getting into any of that. It does come across like Mork showing up to challenge Fonzie. It's just this external character coming in and trying to shake our lives up, and we have to vanquish her.
Yeah, I get what you're saying about how she is played as arch villain, but I don't think we lose any of that nuance in Roc's performance in terms of his struggling with that. and not necessarily struggling with the ego of, isn't it nice to be wanted? And maybe I will, or, won't consider this or whatever. No, I really enjoy that I get to see this man kind of play this desperate version of something that we see women play all the time, that like, no one is believing me. I cannot get anyone to listen to me. And I am desperate because the minute something goes sideways on this, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to be the one that gets in trouble here.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing that I feel like they also don't explore that much. Like, he might get in trouble with his wife or something, but they don't necessarily explore, and maybe to their benefit, the ins and outs of like, oh, well, is the presumption going to be against him because he's the man or something? Like, they don't really get into any of those sort of
his
ancillary
boss, if they
things.
found out that he and her were hooking up, everyone would be giving him high fives.
Yeah. We get back at the beginning, his boss saying, oh, there's been pressure on us to hire a woman. And then he goes, yeah, maybe my wife will finally leave me alone. What a battle axe. Maybe now I can get some. And that was in minute 2 of the episode.
I would say minute 30 seconds of the episode.
So I was like, all right, this isn't going to be the most enlightened show. But yeah, Roc turns to his wife, Eleanor. Now he's like, you're the only person who will believe me. He sort of implies like, you're the only person who will believe this because you're the only other person that's attracted to me.
Yeah, you get it. You want a piece of me. You understand. You'll understand why she wants me so bad. And of course, she kind of laughs at that and is like, all right, honey. And she does believe him. And she's like, hey, though, you're going to need to handle this yourself.
Yeah. And so he goes back to work. And it's funny, they don't pursue this, but at first he's talking to his friend, the guy who happens to play the security guard in the office, and he's telling him about all this that's been happening. His friend doesn't believe him. And he goes, okay, here's Angela. She's coming this way. Go hide behind that locker and listen to me talk to her, and then you'll hear. And I wrote down, oh, this is like some Shakespeare stuff. This is some like, go hideth behind that tree.
Go hide behind the curtain. That's how you get stabbed.
Yeah. And it's funny, but they play this out for like 10 seconds. And then the guy's like, I can't hear you.
I can't hear you. Speak up, Roc.
Yeah. And so look, basically Roc confronts her and he's like, this has to stop. He says, like, I don't know what to do. I've told everyone and they don't believe me.
Like, I think even my wife doesn't believe me.
Yeah, and she's like, this is perfect. Tisha Campbell is like, you've confessed and they still don't believe you. This is a free pass.
You're totally clear. So let's go. I know you want me too, kind of a thing. And he's like, no, I'm happily married. I've told you no. And then, from the shower room, the wife like bursts in and is like, get your damn hands off my man.
Yeah.
And Tisha Campbell's like, oh, caught in it, right?
Yeah.
And so we get this whole great confrontation. Eleanor,
standing ovation, of course. Yes. Audience going crazy.
Crazy. We get the girl fight, not really swinging or whatever, but like the threat of the girl fight. Eleanor takes off her earrings and puts them in her purse, which is like, classic 90s, she goes, like, hold my earrings.
I'm about to get real unladylike.
She takes off her earrings. And so, then, Tisha Campbell's like, I'm sorry, won't happen again. My bad, whatever. And she's like, you bet it won't, hussy. And she
just
runs
chases
out.
her off.
She runs out and Roc sits down and he's just like, I can't believe you came here because you didn't trust me. Like, this is where it kind of turns on its head. He's like, you came, you rescued me. Wait a minute. Did you come because you didn't trust me? I told you. And she's like, he goes on this whole monologue and she pulls his lunch out of her purse and is like, you forgot your lunch and I had to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, exactly. And so, he has, it's portrayed also pretty gently, but he goes like, oh, so you believed me. She was harassing me, but you didn't trust me to resist her. And then, immediately gets the comeuppance. And then it ends with them. They're walking out of the locker room, Roc and Eleanor, and she grabs his butt.
Yes.
So it's like, you can get all your ribald butt grabbing from me. So again, this is what I mean, like a similar scenario, but just a completely different take on it, where, I appreciate what you're saying about the sort of gender reversal, because I wasn't totally thinking about it along those lines. I certainly was when they were talking about the sexual harassment stuff, right, and the idea that you get the audience laughing at the very notion that a man could be sexually harassed. But still, I was thinking that that this episode just lacked the subtlety and the insight of the other ones because she's portrayed as such a villain. But yeah, to your point, it does have that other dimension to it.
And that's because look, like I said, I was having that hard time kind of like pulling myself away from the annoying pet peeve of the not making eye contact. So I was just trying to like find anything that I could latch onto that would keep me in the show and not in the like critic of it all. And that once I kind of latched onto that, I was like, oh, this is really cool. The way that that they're weaving this story in this kind of gender flipped situation.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to another Fox classic, The Simpsons.
Season 5, Episode 9, The Last Temptation of Homer.
Yeah. So The Simpsons is in season 5. It's absolutely on fire at this point. This was in the middle of when all of my friends and I were eating this up with a spoon. Everyone thought this was the funniest, smartest thing on TV. And it was. This one episode, the Mindy Simmons episode, we get easily half a dozen iconic moments that everybody remembers. The prank with the parking lot lines being too close together, the Joey Jojo thing in the bar, the Bart Simpson transformation into Jerry Lewis, the Colonel Klink dream, like all of this is what makes The Simpsons so great, is there's all of these things that have no connection to that, central story, but just work their way in there. And so there's just like a million jokes,
So all of those things that you mentioned that were in this episode were like things that you guys redid and talked about and like would say.
Just these lines going, that emergency exit is painted on. Martin Prince going, your appearance is comical to me. All these, thank you, funny scientist type person. Like all of those lines, when Colonel Klink goes, this dream is over. It's just hysterical. And you would say any one of those things, no, Joey Jojo. And like people, we would just know what that was.
I am having the best time watching you relive this. As not a child, as a child who didn't watch The Simpsons, I had none of these references. None of there were probably people saying these things in my middle school and I would have been like, huh?
Yeah, no, these aren't all on the level of like Shagadelic or whatever. But yeah, for those of us who were into The Simpsons, this was what made it great, is that there were so many of these little gags. They were so generous with all of the little references and jokes and stuff that they gave you. And yeah, so many of them were just so memorable to me. So like I said, this one begins with the Bart Simpson prank of repainting the parking lot at the school so that none of the teachers can get out. And you just, it's a treasure trove of just those little one-line performances that Hank Azaria and Harry Shearer would do, of just people going like, let me out of here, go,
I really enjoyed this episode. I always talk about how I'm hesitant when it comes to this show, but just in general, like I'm not a huge fan of the animated type sitcoms. And I'm always kind of like, all right, I guess I'll watch it because it, you seem to like it, or somebody mentioned this one's good, but not really the thing that I know anything about. And this is now the second time that we've watched a Simpsons where I'm like, wow, this is really good. And Homer, his whole journey here, like when we get to the end and we're in the hotel room with him and Mindy and he's all sad and he's like, we're gonna have sex. And I was just like, oh, homie, like I felt so bad for him.
Yeah, well, we talked about it a little bit the other time we covered The Simpsons, which was for our community theater episode. And yeah, what they get from the cartoon of it all is that they can play those same scenarios and those same sort of sitcom-y life lessons and stuff, but it's just at a different tone and a different pitch, and Homer's buffoonery can be sort of bigger and funnier and sillier, and Dan Castellaneta can play it in those much larger ways, even though at the end of the day, it's still treading over all of those same things. In this case, it's learning that, you loved your wife all along. But yeah, it is, like you said, we try to go pretty light on the animated ones, but once in a while there are examples where a particular trope like this is like, oh, the Simpsons did it in this way that it sort of becomes like the platonic ideal of that trope.
Yeah, I mean, it really does a good job. So the setup is Homer, where he works at the nuclear power plant. Mr. Burns has gotten in trouble for breaking all these labor laws. So he, throws the government a bone and says, well, I'll hire a woman. So he hires a woman and Homer's immediately attracted to her, but he's like, whatever. So then one of his coworkers is like, it's probably nothing. Like, go talk to her. You'll realize you have nothing in common.
Yeah.
So he does. And they are basically the same person. They both are like, donuts.
Yeah, it's Barney at the bar who says that because he reads the whole prediction thing off of the napkin. He goes like, your infatuation is based on a purely physical attraction. Talk to the woman and you will see that you probably have very little in common. And when Homer says, that's really insightful. Where did you get all that? Oh, it's written on this napkin. But yeah, he talks to her. We should mention her name is Mindy Simmons. So we're already getting this thing of like, they're sort of the same person. And she gives back to him all of these things that at season 5 now have become very familiar Homerisms. The can't talk eating, that's something that he likes to say, the general love of donuts and all of that. And like you said, they are just total like mirror images, except that she's a hot lady.
Right. And he just can't stop daydreaming about her. And every attempt that he makes to kind of disabuse himself of this affection is thwarted. So he's like, you know what? I'm just going to stay away from her. And I'm going to tell her I'm going to stay away from her. Oh, no, can't, because I wrote it on my hand and it all gets, I got sweaty palms when she walked by. And I'm going to, then they get trapped in an elevator together. And he's like, think on sexy thoughts. And of course, it turns into a daydream. And then we come out of it and she's standing in the elevator doing the exact same thing, going, think on sexy thoughts, think on sexy thoughts.
We don't get to see her version of what the unsexy thoughts are. But then, Homer stops the elevator and goes like, well, I'll just get out here. See you later.
This is my stop. And slides down the side of the nuclear reactor vent.
He goes, this is my floor. But and then of course he gets home. First of all, while he's leaving, he goes, vile temptress. I bet she thinks Ziggy's gotten too preachy too. Which, talk about a time capsule joke. Like, Ziggy was this comic strip. I just looked it up to confirm. It's there's no way to describe it. It's just like a big smiley face that was like this comic strip that was just the most innocuous. Like,
Ziggy was like we had Ziggy coffee mugs.
Yeah,
Ziggy was like it was one of the comic strips that was just in the circle, so it would just be like
like
one
the Family
pane.
Circus.
Yeah, but Family Circus sometimes had multiple panes, but they would always have a circle. But yeah, Ziggy was one that was like in a circle as well, and it was for some reason I feel like didn't that one have something to do with like a case of the Mondays? Didn't we get that? Wasn't it sort of a little bit like Dilbert too?
Yeah, or Kathy. I'm looking at one right now that says, I just ate 6 Happy Meals and I'm still depressed.
Yeah.
So like that kind of thing. So yes, it's just a funny line for Homer to say, oh, I bet she also thinks Ziggy's gotten too preachy lately. But he gets home and then we get the other half of this equation where not only do you have this, sexy new coworker, your wife is sort of turning into a zombie before your eyes.
Yeah,
right?
Well, so they had this great scene at the very beginning, which kicks off the B plot of Bart turning into a nerd. And it's that they have new insurance. So they have an HMO now.
Yeah.
And so this, of course, very 90s, like HMO was just kind of becoming a thing.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton was trying to socialize our medicine.
And so we had the HMO was like everything under one roof. So you could get your glasses, your regular doctoring, your podiatry, your, dry scalp, all the things that Bart was dealing with. You could get all in one place. And so they went from bouncing from doctor's appointment to doctor's appointment to doctor's appointment throughout the day at this one big
each one referring
Walmart
you to the next
building, right?
Yeah,
each
going
one referring you to the next.
The throat sounds a little scratchy. Let me give you something for that. Oh, you should see the dermatologist down the corridor there.
For your dry scalp. And so after spending the day in this like Walmart warehouse of medical procedures, they come home and Marge has a cold because she's been exposed, and Bart is now dressed up like Buster Poindexter.
He's Jerry Lewis. He's walking around going, hi, everybody. Yeah, he's got the glasses and the elevator shoes and everything. Yes, it's very funny. And that leads to a whole B-plot where he's inducted into this secret nerd society that lives like in between the walls. It's kind of like the what is it called in Harry Potter? The room that they train in the Order of the Phoenix that like can't be accessed by the rest of us.
Oh yeah,
the room of requirement or something.
Well,
like
the
that.
room of requirement is like it only appears when you require it.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. But yeah, so it's that kind of thing. But yes, as far as Homer and Marge, she's all sick and weird looking, and she goes, "Look, I had a T-shirt made up of me in the mall. I got 50 cents off because it's smudged." And it's like this picture of her all like distorted and everything. So yeah, it's just meant to set up this contrast between she's not at her best.
And they can't, he can't like reaffirm his love for her by having sexy times with her. He's like, let's spend some good time together. And she's like, oh, homie, I love that. And then shows him this shirt that's all her face like distorted. And he's like, ugh.
Yeah. And then we also have one of the funny parts where he's watching TV, and as he's flipping through the channels, everything he goes like, it's like John F. Kennedy, and like it lists several like famous philanderers, and it goes, did cheating on their spouses make them great?
Yeah.
And then it cuts.
Cheat your way to the top at 11.
Yeah. Hail to the cheat.
That's right.
The name of the thing. Cheat. And then he flips to like the Nature Channel, and it's like, this species of fly has over 50,000 sex partners and never feels a moment of guilt.
Yeah. He's like, everything is telling me to cheat, even the animals.
Yeah. And then when he falls asleep and has a dream, it's Colonel Clink.
Right.
Because it's a funny thing where
from Hogan's Heroes.
Yeah. It goes, first it's Isaac Newton. It goes like, oh, I'm just your conscience, but I'm going to take this form of a presence that you would find familiar.
Yeah. Someone you would trust.
Yeah. And so, of course, he doesn't really know Isaac Newton. So it becomes Colonel Clink from Hogan's Heroes, which I don't really trust. This is a perfect example of a Simpsons thing where I don't really get the reference. I didn't watch Hogan's Heroes.
Went off the air in 1971, so no surprise.
But it's still hilarious. This Colonel Clink character is really funny, and every time he takes him, it's kind of like A Christmas Carol, the Charles Dickens thing, where he takes him to the alternate world where, oh, if you and Marge hadn't gotten married, this is what would have happened. But everything he shows him is a good scenario.
Right. Marge is president.
Yeah.
He and Mindy are together and very rich.
Yeah.
Well, so the actor who played the Colonel Clink in the original Hogan's Heroes does the voice in this.
Okay.
And it was one of his last, I think it was his last TV appearance because he was getting up there.
Yeah. And Homer keeps going like, do you know that Hogan had a radio hidden in the coffee pot? And he goes, he did. And then, when the fantasies don't prove the point he's trying to make. It's just feeding this idea that Homer should get together with Mindy. And so, Colonel Clink goes, this fantasy is over. And disappears.
That's really funny.
Yeah. And then Homer wakes up. And so it's like, nothing. He's looking for something to stop it. And this is where it sort of becomes, like you're saying, this thing that's going to take him through to the end where it's like, this just seems inevitable. Like this is going to happen.
Yeah. And so they get chosen to go to this convention in Capital City, the two of them.
The Windy Apple.
That's right. So they go to Capital City for the convention, and then while at the convention, they are chosen as the king and queen of the convention.
Yes.
So they're gifted a fancy dinner at this Chinese restaurant.
Yes, this is a power convention. This is all different sources of energy. And I just have to point out again, this is another thing the Simpsons just totally excelled at. Anytime there was an opportunity to have a lot of little sort of text-based sight gags, little posters and signs and stuff. And so, you get all of the different energy sources. You get fossil fuel sort of being like...
solar energy was like, it's the future, it's that. And it was just one guy in the booth. And somebody comes up to him and is like, so does this really work? And the guy's like, yeah. And he was like, okay, great. Pulls the curtain, beats him up. And then it has the fossil fuels on top of it. And that guy's gone. And it's like, fossil fuels, use us and nobody gets hurt. Yeah.
And the one that they just pan past quickly, which I loved, was, what about wind? That was just a funny little quick one. So Mindy and Homer are sent to Madame Chow's. And I really related to this when Mindy goes, goes, "It was sure nice of them to make us cheeseburgers," right? Because neither of them are worldly enough to eat anything at a Chinese restaurant.
Which I found out, fair listeners, just yesterday, that Jay wouldn't eat chicken until he was 15 years old, which I was shocked at. I said, "What did you eat?" He said, "Cheeseburgers."
Yeah, they were nice enough to make me cheeseburgers. So yeah, they get back to the hotel, and this is the scene you're talking about where Homer is just paralyzed by his indecision. And again, just like with the community theater episode, I would say this is something that you just couldn't do in live action. Like, you could do something with this overall story arc, but this particular scene would just be odd if it were played this way in live action. But as it is in animated form, you just sort of buy into it that Homer is reduced to this sobbing puddle.
Yeah, well, his fortune cookie says, you know, you're going to find a new love that's not your wife or something like that. And he's resigned. And so they're sitting on the bed in the hotel room because they found out earlier in the episode that they have these adjoining rooms with the door that, you know, they can just open and don't have to go out in the hallway at all between them. And so he's sitting on the bed just crying. And Mindy's like, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "Well, we're going to have sex now. And I love my wife. I love Marge," you know, and he's so sad. I mean, he just really feels like the whole universe is telling him this is what he's going to do. And he doesn't have another choice. And it's like heart-wrenching in a way because like, that's kind of the way, you know, fidelity is. Yeah. You know, the world absolutely is tempting you all the time. And you just have to be like, I'm not interested in that. I'm looking over here and doing this other thing instead. And so it was really touching. Yeah. And then what happens? He's like eating a chili dog and his shirt bursts open and he's wearing the undershirt of Marge that she got, where her face is all stretched out. Yeah. So he's like trying to hold on to her in any way he can in these situations. And Mindy's like, "It's okay. You know how I feel about you, but it's your decision. You can make the decision." And then they kiss, and then it like turns and we see this woman in a red dress who very much like Mindy was just having on a red dress. So it was like, oh, we're going to like, this is it. Homer's going to cheat. And then we hear Marge's voice. So, you know, they had that one kiss and he sent Mindy on her way and he calls Marge and Marge has come and now they get to have a romantic weekend together because her cold is gone.
Yeah. Very impressive when they would do these in the 90s, a 3D camera move. Just as an animator, I just have to say that they would do those in this kind of animation is always impressive. And it does that where the camera, like you said, sort of spins around to sort of fake you out and show you, it's actually Marge that he got together with in the hotel. And yeah, so that was his solution, you know, invite Marge over. And yeah, just like you're saying, I think what this one really nails is despite all of the silliness and all of the over the top characterizations, the cognitive dissonance, you know, that Homer's brain is just short circuiting because, you know, he wants something but doesn't want it, and it's something that everybody has to experience. It's at the heart of all addictions and just all struggle, really, is that thing of like different parts of our brain want different things, and sometimes it's really hard to reconcile that. And this is what is so great about The Simpsons, is that it can take you on this crazy journey to the HMO and to the nuclear power fair and show you a million different things and reference politics and movies and all that. And, you know, Homer can be so ridiculous, and yet, you know, just as well as any other sitcom, you get that little sort of nugget of emotional truth at the end. Yeah,
it really was lovely to, like, how funny and strange is it that I think the character that is best able in all four of our episodes to kind of play that struggle within the two sides, like when you want something but you don't want to want that thing, how you can handle it. We don't see it actually handled. We just see that the decision was made, right? We see the like end of that, and then Marge there. But yeah, it was really well done. Yeah. All right, let's move into the 21st century for Till Death. Season 1, episode 14, The Colleague.
Yeah, this was one I wasn't super familiar with. I mostly knew this from ads in bus stops and stuff. Like, this was one where we were adults when this came out. There were ads on the subway and everything. And I kind of dismissed it as like essentially an unofficial Everybody Loves Raymond spinoff, you know, understanding it wasn't literally the same character, but just kind of being like, oh, well, here's a sitcom that I wasn't that interested in the first place. And now one of the supporting actors for that guy, for that show has been promoted to his own family sitcom. So I was just kind of a hard pass on this whole thing. And I'll say, watching it now, this was definitely a pleasant surprise for me. This had a different sort of sensibility than I was expecting, and I kind of liked it.
Yeah, I did watch this show. I probably only the first couple of seasons, though. I don't remember. It went on for 4 seasons. It was super low rated for most of that time. 2006 to 2010 is when it was on the air. So yeah, it was one of these weird ones where it was basically canceled in the, there was a writer's strike that put it on hiatus in like 2008. And then it was basically canceled in season 3 where they had filmed a bunch of episodes that they didn't air. And the ratings were so bad that they just didn't finish season 3. And then it was surprise renewed for season 4. Because of some like sweetheart licensing deal that like whatever studio had made with Fox to try to get it up to the 100 episodes that it needed to go and do syndication. And so they ended up with this sweetheart deal. So it worked out, and they aired an extra long season 4 that included the episodes that they didn't air from season 3. So season 4 was like 37 episodes or whatever. But yeah, and what I remember of this show is that you have the guy, Brad Garrett from Ray Romano, and Jolie Fisher, who's from Ellen. They're the main couple. They've been married like 24 years or something like that. And then newlyweds move in next door. And the newlyweds, the husband is played by Shitbreak from American Pie, Eddie K. Thomas. And so, and the girl I don't really know. So that's like the setup. It's the like couple that's been around the block as a couple, and the couple that's like brand new, just kind of cutting their teeth as newlyweds. And the husbands both work at the school. So the Brad Garrett is a history teacher, and Eddie K. Thomas is also a teacher, but I think he later becomes like the assistant principal. And that is the setup of the show. Well, I didn't know this, but both the other couple, the newlywed couple, they leave at the end of season 2. They didn't come back.
Huh. Yeah, this definitely has the feeling of that rules of engagement thing where it's going to be 2 couples, right? A study of 2 couples at 2 slightly different points in life. And that's going to be the basis of our show. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me that this wasn't highly rated or that it didn't do super well. Not because it's bad, but just this is that time where these shows are having their lunches eaten by The Office and their single camera competitors. 30 Rock. They're just, these shows are starting to be like for your grandma. You know?
They're not for like the cool people don't watch these. But Brad Garrett and Jolie Fisher are really funny. Yeah.
I have to say, I felt a little gaslit about this Jolie Fisher lady. I'm asking, what is she from? And you're like, Jolie Fisher, she was in everything. Come on, she was everywhere. I'm looking at it now. When you look her up, the first thing that she's known for is this show. The second thing is the 1999 film adaptation of Inspector Gadget.
Well, I don't know about that. She was she was like the best friend in Ellen.
She's in Ellen, but this is not exactly a ubiquitous actress.
She seemed like it to me, and she's Carrie Fisher's half sister. So I don't know.
Daughter of
Eddie Fisher.
Okay, not of Deborah Reynolds. That's Carrie
not of
Fisher's
Debbie Reynolds.
mom.
That's right.
Yeah, so she's the wife. Brad Garrett is the dad, and they work, or he works at a school, like you said. So this begins at some sort of like fundraising dinner or something. It's like they're at the school
spaghetti
at
dinner
night.
for the school. Yeah, it's like a spaghetti dinner, and Brad Garrett's going back for like 6ths or whatever, and Jolie Fisher's teasing him. And then the husbands are sitting there and their new colleague is like walking down the aisle of the cafeteria looking for a place to sit. And Brad Garrett tells Eddie K. Thomas, like, hey, word to the wise, don't try to make good friends with the new woman that you're working with. That's not a good look. Your wife isn't going to like that.
Yeah. Now, I thought this was an interesting little nugget that I wanted to ponder for a second. He says, once you're married, the only female friends you can have are the ones that are grandfathered in, which I think isn't 100% true. But listening to that, I was kind of like, yeah, because I just think of all of my friends that I'm so close with. And it's like, yeah, they're all from when I was a kid or maybe, like a younger person. And it's like, yeah, you're grandfathered in. Nobody can get jealous of you.
Well, you absolutely can get jealous, but you're less likely to win the battle on that one. You kind of have to be like, your friends are me. So that's not going to work out. But it is very difficult to bring in the new friend of the opposite sex, whether single or married. If that, I'm talking about the person, the new friend.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It is a challenge, and it would be a challenge for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And if there is a situation like this where one of the people is a young single person, then it can spell trouble. Exactly. And so we get, like we often do, the last most recent sitcom episode is a little bit of a subversion or a twist on the trope. So in this one, Brad Garrett is going in fully aware of this trope. The spouse that is to be tempted is preemptively going like, no, I know how this goes.
I'm not going to talk to you at all. Yeah. Stonewalled.
Yeah, I'm not going to have anything to do with this. And meanwhile, the spouse is the one, sort of mocking the whole idea, scoffing at the notion of like, hey, come on, what do you think that just because you get to know your colleague, that means you're having an affair? Don't be silly.
Well, and she has this whole speech that she gives when they get back to the house after she has gotten this woman's number for Brad Garrett's character. And she's just like, we're dead inside. We don't care about anything. We are not sexual anymore. We don't care about this stuff. And she like goes on.
And that's another nugget that I wanted to dig into. And we'll see this play out in the episode. But yeah, that idea of this isn't the angle on it that they're taking yet, but this is what I choose to sort of extract from it, that a little bit of jealousy is good, because if you don't have anything, you can say, oh, we have this absolute trust in each other. Or you could look at it from a more jaded point of view and just go like, well, no, we just don't feel any emotions and we don't care about anything. So
that's basically what she's saying. She's like, we're dead inside. We now are at the point in our relationship where it would be more work for us to not be with one another than it would be to just be with one another. And neither one of us is ready or able to do that again. So we're stuck, basically, is like her thesis here. And so he's like, well, all right. I mean, that's cool. So he, gets in touch with this woman who wants to see his syllabus because she also teaches history. And so she comes over and they're sitting at the table and, Jolie Fisher makes them like some pot stickers or whatever. And she's overhearing this conversation where they realize they're like the same person.
This is a Mindy Simmons situation.
Exactly. They both are like finishing each other's sentences about this obscure historical author, this
historical
professor.
Take on history.
Yes, this like historian that they both love his book, and he's coming to speak at the bookshop on the weekend. And Brad Garrett is the moderator of the Q&A, and she's like, oh my God, you're my hero.
Yeah, this is where the tide turns. Because prior to this, Joy, the wife, is teasing him. She's going, oh, it's time for your date, honey. Now, this was another thing I wanted to pause on because this plot contrivance is a little strange to me. Like, I think that Joy is absolutely right to say, oh, it's you don't need to consider it infidelity just because you're working with this
woman. Like, I'm not going to get jealous of you working with this woman.
But I'm not a teacher. This thing of they need to get together after hours, like immediately, like I urgently need to come to your house at night to go over the syllabus. Like I understand that notoriously teachers aren't given enough time in their workday to do all their plans and stuff, but this couldn't be like a let's stay after for a few minutes after school. Like this, having known a lot of teachers, I haven't heard of a lot of late night syllabus sharing, sessions.
No, I kind of got the impression that was only happening because he had blown her off at school and now the class was about to start and she's new and she was basically kind of like writing her own syllabus and she hadn't had this opportunity and he'd been blowing her off and wouldn't work with her. And now she's like about to start the class and she's like, I'd love to look at your syllabus so we can compare. And so it was like last minute kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But then it turns into, let's go see this guy talk.
Right. That's where everything changes because Joy starts out as teasing him and laughing at him. He tucks in his shirt, which I thought was a funny sort of observational thing because it's like, yeah, if you were in this situation, you might spiff yourself up a little bit just to be, sort of professional or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, like normally at home, I don't know about Brad Garrett's character, but like you wear sweatpants, whereas if we had someone coming over, no matter what, you would get all dressed up nice, and I would 100% be like, oh, get spiffy for your date. I would make the same joke.
Yeah, this is how it would play out. The person would dress up a little bit, and then the spouse would make fun of them. So yeah, it all feels very real. And then when they realize that they both love a historical take on history by
William Duffy or something like that.
Yes, by Professor William Duffy. And they start like totally nerding out about it. They're going like, oh, the chapter about the Harry Sinclair jury tampering? Oh my God. And so, yeah, this is where Joy, it's like, it's not so funny anymore. And it's like, okay, now I really am kind of jealous. They make plans to go to this book reading. And she starts doing the thing of like, okay, I'm going to take an interest. Joy is
I'm
like,
going to try to read this book so I can like be a part of these conversations.
Yes, which I feel like is definitely a sort of subtrope of this kind of scenario is like, oh, you don't think that I'm into blah, blah, blah. You don't think I know about sports or whatever it is, So in this case, yeah, it's trying to read this history book that's like the size of a phone book.
I thought that was a really sweet way to go about it as well. Like, it's really nice to not have a bunch of examples of like toxic couples in this lineup. Her solution isn't to like get mad. It's to say, oh, he's really connected with this other woman on this intellectual level about this thing. Maybe I, as his wife, could like make a little effort to be interested in the things he's interested in. Let me try to read the book. And of course she fails because she can't get past the second page. She keeps falling asleep.
Yeah. At first she tries reading it. Then she makes a house of cards on it, then she just falls asleep on it.
And so, but I was like, oh, that's a really sweet kind of like positive way to look at it. Like, oh, I want to try to connect with my husband too. So
yeah. So the next scene is at the bookstore, and parts of this felt very true and parts of it felt strange, because if you've ever been to one of these author appearances at a bookstore, they are often very sparsely attended. So it definitely gets that right, that there's 5 or 6 people in these little folding chairs, these things they used to always have at Borders books and stuff, these little guest appearances. And Eddie, Brad Garrett's character, introduces the author. What felt strange to me was the guy takes the little podium and just immediately answers a question by Lucy, the young woman, which it made it feel like this is a press conference that happened after like a bomb was dropped or something, where it's just like, no time for nonsense. Yes, Washington Post, I'll take it from you.
Like,
wouldn't there
be
a little
questions and then they do the reading?
Yeah, which is strange. You would think it would be a little bit of like, oh, let's have this guy talk a little bit, maybe read. But yeah, Lucy, now we haven't really talked about her. I think she is really good casting because, she's very attractive woman. Obviously, they have their choice of young actresses.
Yeah, but she's more like mousy, like a history teacher would be, rather than bombshell like Tisha Campbell.
Exactly. So it's played in this way of like, yes, of course you would recognize that this is somebody that there'd be the potential for some sort of something going on. But it's not the thing of like heads turn when she walks into a room. Like she just seems believable. Like she seems like a young teacher that, a 40-year-old guy would be be like, oh, yeah, look, there's kind of a young, pretty lady working here now. You know?
Yeah.
And so the Q&A plays out with Lucy asking a very intelligent question, you know, about like trade routes and how was it just the trade routes that influenced the spread of culture, or was it the migrational shifts? And, you know, the guy...
Climate and all.
Yeah. The guy answers her in this way that's, you know, both learned but also kind of funny. And then we see Joy, you know, again, right out of the playbook for this kind of trope. She's shoving her way into the back row of this Q&A, and she starts asking a question about page 1.
She's like, on page 1 of your book.
Yeah.
That I loved, by the way.
Yeah, and she's asking about this like very basic sort of like contrast that he set up, where it's something like, oh, you said that, you know, history is a mystery, and yet you also say that it's clear. Well, how can you possibly reconcile those two? You know, it's something like that.
And he's like, well, on page 2 of my book, I explain that that's the thesis I'm now going to examine for the next 40 chapters. And she's like, which you did wonderfully.
Yes. And then she goes, all right, I guess it's time to break out the big guns. And then she just unbuttons her shirt and just kind of like sticks her boobs out, basically.
Well, right. So this is the thing that I remember about this show. And I don't know if you noticed it like earlier in the episode, but every single episode has something to do with Joy just having like great tits. That is what this show mentions all the time. So she always wears kind of really low cut shirts with push-up bra, and she's not a tiny petite woman. She's like a normal sized woman who has big boobs. And so when they're very on display, but not in like a Dolly Parton way, more like in I wear relaxed clothes, but I have this like great push-up bra on.
I have to admit, when we were first watching this, I wasn't sure if it was the same actress that played the wife of Ross's ex-wife on Friends, who also shows up in Breaking Bad. I was like, you know, it looks
it's
just
not,
like
but they
her.
have similarly curly hair.
I was like, it looks just like her, but this lady's got much bigger boobs. And so that was kind of like the big difference to me.
That's so funny. Well, so that is like a big part of the show, is that Joy has great knockers. And she mentions it, and there's, you know, her costumes always play to it, always. So when she showed up at the book reading, she didn't have her boobs on display. And then she's like, all right, well, time to take out the big guns. And she takes off her, you know, flannel or whatever she has on, and she's got a wife beater on. So she's not showing a lot of cleavage, but she's just showing how big they are.
Yeah. She's just generally sort of like taking the low road at this point and just sort of trying to command the attention in any possible way. And she's kind of making a fool of herself. And I just noticed that this is another one of these shows where the wife gets to be silly. You know, this is like Martin, like Dick Van Dyke. You know, Brad Garrett gets to take his turn being the guy kind of putting his face in his hands and just kind of being sheepish and embarrassed, while his wife makes a spectacle of herself.
Yes.
And so, you know, good for them.
Well, so they have this conversation in the back of the room and I think this is the reason the Q&A was first and the reading was second, was so she could have that embarrassing thing, and then they could still be in the book space while the guy was doing the reading, having this discussion. So they're in the back of the little like bookstore, and she is, you know, in her wife beater, and she's like, you know, we just never connected about intellectual stuff. We connected about these. And he's like, I like connecting about those.
What she says is, you know, she's jealous about the way that your eyes light up when you talk to her, you know, which is something that, I think, you know, like anybody can relate to, that idea that even if it's not another person, you see your partner get excited, you know, or passionate about something that you're not a part of. And you know, she says, that we don't have that intellectual connection. We have a sexual connection. And it's interesting because it's like, you know, they have to sort of meet halfway, where, you know, part of what he's saying is like, no, it's not just that. We have all these other things in common too. But I think also what she needs to accept is, your relationship is not going to be everything to either of you, you know, and that you are going to have other people and other things that you're passionate about also. And you need to sort of have the confidence to be able to see the other person get passionate about a cheeseburger or whatever and not think that it takes away from how they feel about you.
Yeah. So another great thing about this show, not this episode overall, is this was my first introduction to Kristen Ritter. She played their grown daughter who's away at college. And so she was kind of a recurring character in season 1. And then like basically every season she was played by a different actress. You know that Kate Micucci actress?
Sure, yeah.
She played their daughter in the last season. So like every season it was a different
Kate
actress.
Micucci and Kristen Ritter are the same character?
Same character. Yeah.
Interesting.
And they make reference to it over time. But yeah, so that was just another kind of fun little memory when I was thinking about, what do I remember about this show? I remembered the two main characters were really funny. I like their, Brad Garrett and Jolie Fisher's kind of chemistry and their sort of banter. I remembered that I liked Kristen Ritter and I thought she was really funny when she would come in and have her moments. But overall, like going back to the trope and this episode, I think this one, it ends with a whimper. And maybe if we had watched it before we watched The Simpsons, it would have resonated better. But because they just didn't go anywhere with it and it was just like, yeah, we like each other. Okay.
Well,
I was kind of like,
I guess so, but I liked that, it ends with her saying, well, I guess we're not dead inside. And so to me, that was enough of a journey, I guess, that it started with her going like, we can't possibly be jealous because A, we're emotionally dead, B, we're too old for anybody to be attracted to us. Like there's just nothing going on anymore. And so the fact that this little, episode, if you will, of their lives got her stirred up enough to start reading this book and then go to this book club thing and make this ruckus and everything. And that she went on, this silly little sitcom-y journey and kind of realized like, okay, I guess there is a little bit of, uncertainty or self-consciousness or jealousy, as it were, present here, or the potential for that means that there's still some life here. I liked that. I liked that as a notion.
Well, it was just that there was no so what. There was no like, so what do we do with that? Oh, maybe we should go take a class together. There wasn't a so what after that realization, which is probably more true to life. You don't always have a so what in life, but it just felt like it ended rather than like having an ending.
Did it end with them sort of implying that they're going to go off and bang? Was
of course it did. But I think that was enough. Every episode of this.
Yeah, but to me, that's enough to be like, we got a little bit of spark back. Like, I think that's all it really needs to
the
do.
Only episode of our 4 that didn't end like with a, hey, let's go bang, was the Seavers, Growing Pains. They didn't end like that.
Well, they hugged. They were at the newspaper studio.
I know, but they didn't chase them up the stairs or whatever.
I think there was something going on.
There was something to that hug.
Yeah, I could see there was something in his pocket. I don't know. All right. So looking back over these, again, really strong lineup. I love how they all kind of overlap in the basic story beats and yet really have these different attitudes. Yeah,
it was really nice. Like, I was worried that this was just going to be one after another of like the young sexy woman and the, man and blah, I'm so hot kind of I was just worried it was going to be dry and stayed in that way. And it wasn't. Every one of these kind of took it in a different direction, upended what I would have thought was the trope, but then in doing so made me realize that the trope is much more about human relationships and interactions than it is being tempted by a sexy coworker.
Yeah, I think Roc was kind of a disappointment for me, again, being so sort of nostalgic and curious about it, going like, oh yeah, I used to love that show. I haven't seen it in, 30 years. What is that like? And kind of realizing like, it's kind of just another one of these Fox,
that's fun. Well, and I think probably because I came to it with a different expectation. I had never seen Roc. And so, I only knew about Roc because you had told me about it years ago.
Yeah.
And so this is my first time seeing it. I was surprised and really delighted in the way that, when I picked up on what I thought they were doing, which was trying to do the subversion and the gender swap. And I was like, oh, I really like that. That's really smart. Way to go, 1992.
Yeah, no, I think it is both things at once to me. I think it is a clever play on the gender politics of the time, to have it, in all the ways that we said. And yet at the same time, I think that over-the-top characterization of Tisha Campbell's character just made it, like, to me, the least insightful of all of them. That it was, again, an interesting subversion of the gender thing, but also just kind of seemed like a comic book villain that they had to defeat, whereas the other ones seemed like a little bit of a, just more of a thoughtful, like, exploration of that.
Well,
that
and the biggest surprise, I think, of all for me is always The Simpsons, because, it's not something that I know well. It just I know it as the cultural institution, not for any of the reasons that it is a cultural institution, And so that's always a joy. And I really felt like I had a lot of feelings for Homer throughout that journey. And I was like, it's crazy that this cartoon can be so touching.
Yeah. No, and Growing Pains, of course, gives you exactly what we're looking for in terms of a mid-'80s sitcom, keep it coming. And yeah, for me, Til Death was the surprise, for one that I wasn't familiar with at all. And to discover, like, oh, okay, I'm learning that I don't even hate Everybody Loves Raymond as much as I thought I did. And if this show is going to get rid of the grandparents that can't stand each other and swap them out with a young couple that actually has a nice vibe, and, we don't have, like, annoying little kids that we have to figure out what to do with, like, this seems like an improvement on Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a totally different thing.
Yeah, but so yeah, I would look forward to trying to, put that on the roster in the future. So yeah, really strong lineup overall. All right, so much for being tempted by a sexy coworker. What are we talking about next week?
Bust out your false eyelashes and your glitter, Jay. It's time for a beauty pageant. We are watching Designing Women, Season 1, Episode 2, The Beauty Contest, A Different World, Season 1, Episode 17, Mr. Hillman, Malcolm in the Middle, Season 6, Episode 22, Mrs. Tri-County, and Parks and Recreation, Season 2, Episode 3, Beauty Pageant.
Yep. We're talking all about the beauty pageants next week, and until then, we will consider this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.